Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is sponsored by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Use our link in the description the next time you get your cards to help support the show. Today's episode is also made possible by our Patreon subscribers. If you want to support the show directly, head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and you can become part of the SCULPTY family today. Or if you don't want to do any of that, leave a like and comment on YouTube or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as an offering to Algorithm Jesus.
Hey, you at home. This is an intro to a podcast known as the Mind Sculptors. Welcome. I know, professional, well-run, succinct,
organized,
professional,
that's
diligent, synergy,
very mindful,
mindfulness, respectful. Yeah. These are all words that describe your favorite Magic the Gathering podcast where two chuckle fucks talk to you about competitive Elder Dragon
two
Highlander.
people with severe ADHD try to rein it in for an hour and a half.
just try so unsuccessfully to rein it in.
Welcome everybody to the show. I'm Cal.
I'm Ian.
And this week we're going to be talking about the Top Deck Open and Invitational, which was this past weekend. Yeah. And we're going to look at this metagame breakdown. We're not going to do the top 16 breakdown. That's what people go to you for. But we're going to look at the thing. Yeah, it's a different thing. We're going to take a look at this metagame and what it looks like, what this means moving forward. I do think that we spoke a little bit on this in our our power rankings episode, but I think this will give us an opportunity to kind of just talk a little bit more about this and see what things look like moving forward. I think there's some interesting things on the horizon. So.
And I do think like there is a really interesting conversation about like what the Invitational reflected, and also what it didn't accurately reflect that people will miss without context too.
Yeah. Right? And I think that's why when we do these numbers, I don't want to just throw like a graphic at you and then just put it on Twitter, right? For like this sort of thing. I think there's so much context that you lose that if we don't do this sort of thing, you're just not going to understand like exactly what you're being presented with. So that's what we're here to do today, which is pretty exciting. For folks who are wondering how we did at the event, I performed terribly playing what was effectively the first draft of a deck at a giant 250 person event, which was a great plan on my part. I have no notes on that. Got some valuable like kind of insights into it, but you on the other hand, you finished in the final four of the Invitational, which was actually super impressive because your day one start was rough.
No, I had a bunch of like I described them as like 3% games in the sense that like the amount of things that went wrong in some of those day one games were like you couldn't make it up, you know what I mean? Like just crazy stuff. And I'll talk about it more in my tournament breakdown that I'm going to do on my own channel. But yeah, had some absolutely wackadoodle shit happen day one, and then had pretty solid comeback and was able to make it all the way to the finals. Had to win 3 of my 4 games that day to end up in the finals, and I did. And then unfortunately lost in the finals. I had a mulligan to 2. I got time twistered, but the time twister ate a Bowmasters too. So Bailey basically before his first untap had a 26 power creature or something like that.
Oh my god. Yeah, Bowmasters is fine, guys. No problems. No. Yeah. What the hell? That sucks.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So yeah, that game was over before it started. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The Open finished with Brian Koval kind of coming out of about a year slump for him, and came in with Rogsai and had a double Rogsai finals pod and took down that invitational. One thing that I'm gonna, let's get into some of these numbers too, because one thing that I think is really important to look at is Rogsai and Tim Necrom, like, were in the open meta made up about a quarter of the entire field. And if you look over at the invitational, it like got closer to half the entire field.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely going to like explicitly skew the metagame, right? Is like when, and that's, I think, people going into it were like, oh, well, the MV is going to reflect the field. And it's like, well, no, not really. Like people are going to be playing more diverse strategies, I think, in a standard cEDH tournament. I think like when most of the people who were grinding the circuit and did pretty well are like Cabal members who only play Rogsai, then like of course that's what the invitational is going to look like, right? Obviously Brian Koval was able to do very well in the Open, right? Like the deck is still extremely good. That's not kind of my point. My point is I don't think it was an accurate reflection in the metagame explicitly, because like you're not going to have multiple double Rog pods. You're not going to have multiple triple Rog pods. Like,
and this is a point that I wanted to hit on with this, is because I heard a lot of conversation over the weekend. I was like, well, what do you do to fix the Rogsai problem? So it were, and it's like, I don't know that there's a problem, because the issue with Rogsai gets very quickly solved if the people who are, deciding, oh, the way to fix or to win is to play Rogsai, just played even Tim Necrom. And what I mean by that is obviously like Rogsai goes away if people stop playing it. But my point is if the people who are hopping onto the bandwagon just don't do that and instead play like a deck that they're passionate about or play something differently.
Oh, I see.
Yes, because Rogsai has this thing where the more people play it, the better it gets. It's very different from, we saw in some of the Pro Tour stuff recently, where like that, like in the modern one, the Ruby Storm deck was like the most present deck in that entire tournament, and it fucking sucked. And there are going to be times where the most present deck, Kinnon's a great example of this, right? Where there will be times where Kinnon is like just absurd about it in the metagame, and it just doesn't convert any of that. Rogsai is very different in that the more of that metagame it takes up, the better it's going to do, because Rogsai is better against other Rogsais.
Yeah, when there's no one stopping the fast deck, then
exactly
the deck runs away with it. It's like Godo does really well in a meta full of Godos too.
Exactly, right? and so that's kind of the thing that I'm trying to get at here is if you want to see Rogsai get slowed down, the answer isn't to play Rogsai. The answer is to play the things that are good against Rogsai, which there are plenty of in this format. Nadu's like pretty good. Rogthras, all those sorts of things. I would probably stay away from Kenrith if you're worried about a Rogsai meta. But the answer here isn't to just throw yourself into the Storm meta, because all of that does is it just means that the turn order becomes a turn order simulator. And Rogsai is significantly worse when there are Tivits about, when there's Niv Mizzets about, when there's Tim Necroms about. Like, the grindier the format gets, the worse Rogsai is. And so it is an artificial problem in that people are gravitating towards a deck, and you could just
and I think you're maybe speaking more historically, if I'm being honest. I think like the deck has gotten enough tools nowadays
it
where
certainly has.
It still will perform very well in those circumstances. And once again, I think Koval's performance over the weekend is extremely indicative of that, right? Because we had a mixed metagame and he still was able to chunk it out, right? But like the point is if you consider it so much so that like there are going to be good pilots that do very well with this deck, period. The deck has gotten a lot of good tools lately, and it's still the top 4 decks of the format. Very
100%.
clearly. It only becomes a problem when people hyper proactively steer into proactivity and give up any sort of agency in the game, right? I think is more to the point here, because I think it can come off sort of like you're saying the deck's not real, which it very much is, right?
Well, I think like a really good example of this is, at least in my head, to take it out of Magic for a second, like, when I used to work at GameStop, like that was back when like Call of Duty was like the thing, right? And people used to complain all the time about, why do they release a Call of Duty game every year? And it's like, well, you keep fucking buying it, right? And it's like that's why they release them every year, is because you dumbasses keep buying them. And I feel similarly about the like Rograkh situation. Is it's like, well, man, why is Rograkh winning so much? It's like, because a lot of people are playing Rograkh, and Rograk's better the more people play Rograkh. It's just like it is one of those decks that the more like, and the reason I point this out here in the open meta is it was 10% of the meta. So in a meta where Rograkh is statistically going to be like a sizable portion of the meta, right? You are, 1 out of 10 decks are going to be that deck. You are very in good shape to get into your likelihood of ending up in double Rograkh pods are much higher. And double Rograkh pods are the fucking dream, because that's when you are best positioned to win on Rograkh.
And we see like a lot more balanced numbers, I think, when you address it for the open, right? We have 24 appearances and 3 made it to top 16, right? And like the other ones that were not in the top 16 dropped down a considerable amount. There are a couple with some pretty decent results, right? Like it's a couple in like the winning in bracket, right? But realistically, the deck like put up more understandable numbers. Now, don't get me wrong, still got 2 of the top 4 in that tournament, right? 2 very good pilots playing a very powerful deck. And like I want to make that very clear, that is a big part of what we're talking about. Is like this deck did perform very well, right?
Yes,
just period.
100%.
And so like we're not saying don't play it, because like if it's a good deck and you're a turbo player, for example, someone like Kevin in the top 4 of the open, right, who is just someone who really likes playing turbo decks and is succeeding because he's playing turbo decks, right?
100%. Like Kevin's played like Yidris, like he's played like every variation of a storm deck, honestly. And so like it makes total sense for players like that. But there are players who I know who are not turbo players who are picking up Rograkh, and I'm just like, that isn't the answer to fix the like, if you're not a turbo player, it's going to be harder to pick up.
And I think just like once again, the message I think is getting a little obscured here. The point is not like we're telling you what decks to be playing right now. It's more so if you are concerned that it is a problem to the nth degree, there is technically not a problem, right? Like it is just another good deck in the format. But yeah, I think it's important to note that like, looking back at like the MLC a couple of years ago, right? Like there was a period of time where people were like, oh, turbo deck's the best in the format. Turbo deck's the best in the format. They're unbeatable, X, Y, and Z, right? And this is back when Stacks was not Bowmastered out of the format, right? And when we played the MLC, a lot of people drafted the turbo decks. They thought like, oh, these are the things that are going to go crazy, yada, 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 et cetera, right? And I sort of drafted like a more balanced sort of grouping there, right? And I sort of said it at the top, like, here's what's going to happen, right? Because what did end up happening was that in the meta where artificial diversity was enforced, right? Because you can only draft a certain amount of every deck, right? In that diverse metagame where people were playing diverse strategies, guess what? The mid-range decks and the turbo decks and all of these decks, they all kept up pretty decent numbers, because when people are playing different strategies, the turbo decks aren't insanely favored, right? So the more zoomy you go, the better the zooms are, right? Which is why we always sort of, point out the West Coast metagame, because it's like if they're all playing proactive decks that tend not to be as responsible,
right?
Yeah, the proactive decks are going to do better.
It's a shocker that Rograkh decks do well in a meta that's like full of like fucking Kalia and Rog Tavesh and no blue to be found, right? Like it's just shocker. But I mean, like, I think it's also really important. Rogsai had a very good weekend, but also Tim McCrum had an exceptional weekend as well. Had the most top 16s out of any deck, and also won the Invitational. Just great weekend from both those decks all around. A deck that had a not as good of a weekend is Sisay, believe it or not. Had a pretty rough weekend, pretty rough outing across both these events. And what are your thoughts on Sisay? Just kind of, I don't know that this was a bad metagame for Sisay necessarily. Like, I think this was a pretty
which one?
Metagame over the
That's a really good question. Which one?
Both of them, honestly, both of them were the Invitational, it was 15% of the metagame there. The Open, it was 7% of the metagame there. So like across both of them, it just struggled in both of them though.
Interesting. Yeah, I expected it not to do well in the Invitational. And it didn't do particularly great. Because once again, the whole thing we're talking about is like Rogsai is one of its tougher matchups, and I expected disproportionate numbers of that deck, and that's what we got. Right. Like, I don't know. It's hard to really say any more than that. Like, I did not expect Sisay to do well going into this weekend, right? So the Open maybe is a little more surprising to me, but like when you also don't have your best Sisay pilots because they're in the Invitational,
right,
that makes sense, right? But like we still did have one Sisay in the top 16 of the Open and the Invitational. Oh wait, no, I think we had 3 in the Open, or pardon me, the Envy.
There were 3 that made top 16 in the Invitational.
Which is still like very good, right?
It
like
was very good. The overall win percentage was 21%.
Yeah, it's tough.
Which is real rough. Now, I will say that it was way more along the averages in the Open. It had a 26% win percentage in the Open, which is kind of along the lines of like what most decks tend to put up, is right around that number. So that was like kind of, if average is an underperformance for a deck, it's doing well, right?
Also, funny enough, you remember how last week, and you probably don't remember this because it was a super offhand comment, but we had joked about the things we were expecting to see the Invitational, and straight up, you had said it's not like you're going to see Chain Veil Teferi in the Invitational, and you never guess what deck actually showed up.
There was a Chain Veil Teferi in the Invitational. Yeah.
So
no, I'm convinced that somebody like read my fucking mind. No, that's hilarious. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and this was kind of it was interesting to see that like my experience against Niv Mizzet actually, when I look at the numbers, kind of lines up. Niv Mizzet was only 2% of the metagame, but had the best win percentage of any deck. With 41 with batted a 419 win percentage. It was pretty impressive. My like experience with Niv Mizzet was that it was kind of, when it was at the table, it was running everything. Was kind of the deck in charge, and had one of them make a top 16 out of the 5 entries, which is a 20% top 16 percentage, so not bad. But that was a deck that I think had a stronger weekend, especially considering the fact that there were only 5 entries, and all of them seemed to do pretty well over the weekend. And some of them were like kind of on that
like
bubble.
Bad records, right? Like they all have 2 to 3 wins and a decent amount of draws and stuff like that, right? Like they're definitely far from underwhelming performances.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing is like I look at these numbers and I can see where the bad performances are, right? Like Rograkh, terrible weekend. Kenrith, terrible weekend.
I've been saying for a while. I don't think I think there's something wrong with Rograkh.
I do too. I fundamentally do.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, right? Because and I think we've talked about this on our show, right? And when we do the like power rankings, is like on paper, it should be great. Right.
Yeah.
And something is not connecting. It's the same thing with Malcolm Timna. Malcolm Timna didn't win a single match this weekend.
Fuck, man.
I don't get it. Malcolm Timna is the thing that I don't understand. It does not compute. Malcolm Timna should fucking slap. What is wrong? Like,
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. Like, I just don't get it.
I'm at a total loss. I don't understand.
That's crazy.
But yeah, that we saw that Talion had a real rough weekend. Thrasvile rough weekend. Dahada rough weekend.
Shout out to 21st place Winota deck. Let's go.
Yeah, Winota. Interesting number from Winota, I thought was
3-3-1 is far from a bad record. And then there was another player who had 0-4, but that's okay.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
Honestly, though, like seriously, 3-3-1 is like a really respectable record for that deck.
Yeah,
so
honestly, Tivit had a good weekend, posting up an average of 305 in the open and a straight up 333 in the invitational. Like it just running, doing okay. Again, I think like Tivit's a deck that, like, believe it or not, does better in the Roxai meta because it just has like answers for days.
We talked about this in person, and then I kind of stared at you for like 3 minutes because I feel the exact opposite. But I don't know.
The numbers seem to go along the lines of the Rogsai meta does not seem to be terrible for Tivit. It feels like it should be, because I agree with you. Like on paper, I feel like the faster it goes, Tivit should be worse. But the numbers are showing that now Tivit didn't convert a top 4, but granted, in 2 events, I'm not really looking at top 4s. I'm looking at top 16s overall, and I'm looking at win percentages. And
can we talk about the thing I'm most excited about, and that I said. So this is my this is my thing. I am so happy for Koval for having a great comeback. I'm so sad this deck did not win the whole thing, because I told people, quote, I would be insufferable for several months talking about this.
What deck was it? The
Sephiroth.
Oh yeah, the Sephiroth
made
deck.
top 4 of the Open. We have
that deck was really cool.
Sephiroth. I have played against this player online. Dapper Dummy, I believe, is their thing. I love this deck. I think it is so freaking cool. It makes me feel like Reanimator's playable in our format. It's like literally a rule of law stacks adventure Reanimator deck. Like, or not adventure, venture into the dungeon Reanimator. It's like Sephiroth of the Hidden Ways. I think it's the coolest deck that I've seen in forever. I think it plays some of the wildest cards. And like, once again, like the player made top 4. Like they had a pretty stinking good record going into it, right? Like 4-2-3 on the weekend is crazy.
Yeah, that's like so good.
Yeah. So just big giant shout outs to Brian for that one. It's pretty sick. Not Brian Koval, the other Brian.
the other Brian.
Yeah.
No, this look was really cool. This list was really cool. I gotta say, I really want to take a moment to like really shout out Kevin Simmons, because like Kevin started off like having a rough day in day 1. Kevin didn't start off super strong. I believe, if I remember correctly, when we were talking to Kevin, but my guy went on a run. So proud of that kid. It's just 5-3-1, baby. Let's go. Listen, there are people that I really enjoy rooting for in this format. Kevin is one of them. But yeah, no, the top 16 overall was kind of interesting. One of the decks that I was surprised at kind of how bad it was.
Okay.
Here.
Yeah.
And bad, you can use, as many air quotes as need be, because it, had a 29% win percentage. So 2 made the top 16 was Nadu. I felt like in the games that I saw it, was getting like all of the tables hate. Like the entire table was just like, that is a problem. We have to deal with that. And I couldn't see them like get their wheel. Like I could see them like start to do things, but they would just get like arch enemied out of the game. I feel like every
two
single
made
time.
top 16 for sure, right?
Yeah, there were 2 that made top 16.
Whoa, no shit. An Ornithopter build made top 16? That's crazy.
Yeah.
the one in 16th place is on like Memnite, Ornithopter, Phyrexian Walker, Shield Sphere. That's crazy. That's like Turbo Nadu shit. Wow. And Chatterstorm?
Chatterstorm, no shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a much stormier version of this deck than I am used to, for sure. I was gonna say I assume the mid-range version did the best, and now I'm seeing this Chatterstorm version. Yo, shout outs to Clint Owens for that one. That's a spicy Nadu for sure. That's a
spicy Nadu.
That's a spicy Nadu. I think Joseph's Nadu was literally just a copy and paste of Wounded's, which I get because that list has been insane. And
I think Wounded has like probably the best Nadu list right now.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to assume as much. We had 2/3 coming very close with his version, but definitely running some like off the wall like cards for this strategy, right?
Right.
Going a little deeper into the Naru stuff. So like, you're definitely seeing like a sort of diversity. I will say like one of the things I'm noticing in a lot of these Nadu decks is just like a land count that is lower than I would be comfortable with playing.
Yeah.
And so like that's something to think about when you're playing this deck is like you actually can't afford that many lands on this deck.
Yeah.
That being said, the bird was the big bad going into the weekend. So I think a lot of people, this is the first time that we've had like a big tournament where I think it's been considered, like Nadu feels solved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is worth noting, like we talked about with the Niv stuff, like a lot of these Nadus have 2 wins. You know, like it's not like these Nadus are doing.
I mean, that was what I said. This is like if you look at the stats, like the win percentage average for the weekend was 289. So 289 is not a bad batting average. Like that's a good win percentage for the weekend. It's interesting because we've gone off of these months, right? When we look at the like monthly power rankings, that the standings, it's just dominant, right? Like it is super dominant. And so it's interesting to see in this that it did well, but it didn't really do a whole lot better than like Rograkh or Timnacrom, which again, it should be around that number. That should be where it's at. So but no, I think this is really interesting. I will say in my build of the deck, a card I will be adding into the deck like ASAP Rocky is Volatile Stormdrake, because that turned out to be when I was copying other people's like Gilded Drakes and Storm Drakes with Helm of the Host, was maybe one of the like best things that the deck was doing at certain points when you needed to just like buy time. That felt really strong and powerful. So Stormdrake feels like a card that I want to pick.
Hexproof from activated abilities?
It does. But,
so how do you get the
it's you want to get Gilded Drake, excuse me, is the
okay, there we go.
You want to put the Gilded Drake in there. Because that's in one of the games I was, just put a Helm of the Host on a Gilded Drake and just started taking everybody's stuff. And that kind of gets out of hand really quickly.
I would be inclined to agree for sure.
So that definitely felt really strong. And this is the thing about the deck that I also want to, coming back to what I played over the weekend with Art and Thrasios, is the deck felt strong. It felt good. I mulliganed like an idiot because I'm still not entirely sure what I'm doing with it yet. But once I figured out what I was mulliganing for, like later in the day when we were just kind of playing like practice games and stuff later and the next day, I kind of felt like I had an idea on what I wanted to mulligan for, and that felt a lot better. And I think I kind of am getting a better idea on how to play the deck, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, super smart of me to just take a deck I've never played before, only goldfished, and walk into a 250 person event and be like, yeah, it's fine. It's whatever.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Yeah. If I had played Tibet, I probably would have done better, but whatever. I don't care. I wasn't going there to do well necessarily. So one other thing that I think is really interesting when we look at this is Bjorno Wernog is like
had a good weekend. Yeah.
Had a good weekend, and I was shocked at the like number of those decks that I saw. There was one in the Invitational, there were 4 in the Open, and across the board they all did quite well.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The deck was doing well, but there was one thing that sort of changed the public's opinion on it, and it was a Chthonian Nightmare, right?
Yeah,
like
it's true.
This is one of the first major events since Chthonian's printing where we've actually been able to like see what this deck can do now that it has, arguably one of its best cards ever.
Yeah. No, I'm very interested in seeing how it does moving forward. One of the things that I want to know is, and I guess I can just look at this list, is they're not doing the companion stuff. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I actually think the Lurrus companion is a trap.
Oh yeah, no one's done that in a very long time.
Yeah, I thought so, but I just was like, I need to make sure I'm not losing.
Yeah, no, you're good there. No one has touched companions with that archetype in what's been a hot minute. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think we've talked about this before. Is it's like if you're wanting to play like Rograkh with white, like Bjorno Wernog is a real decent place to play,
Oh yeah, for sure. And I know Eric DeVoe pretty well, who's like the biggest proponent for that deck maybe of all time. So yeah, it's a solid strategy. I've been seeing it for a long time. It's nice to feel like, oh yeah, the rest of the format's catching up to what I've known for a while has been a good deck. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Well, I mean, overall, what were kind of your feelings about the weekend, and what do you feel about this like moving forward, as far as like how do you feel about the like meta game?
I don't know. I'm concerned a little bit about like some of the stuff I saw for sure in the NV. Like I think people are definitely sort of taking this as like, this is the narrative. There's no more like stuff you can do, right? Like this is, I just hope people don't take the Invitational and take it as like that's what the metagame is going to look like from now on, right? Because like I think it was a very selective group of people, very specific pilots. Pilots had a lot to do with it. Obviously, Rograkh had a great weekend. A deck that I'm not a huge fan of the play patterns of, but like it is what it is. Like as many times as I saw Rograkh win games, I also saw it like throw games because they wheeled at the wrong time. You know what I mean?
I had that in my games too, where it was like there were multiple times over the weekend where there was a Rograkh deck who just kind of went for it in the wrong window and lost, and like we all lost because of it.
And to be fair, you can say that about Blue Farm, you can say that about Kinnan, you can say that about Godo, right? Like every deck can be played at the wrong windows and all that stuff. It just feels like it lobs up the sort of follow-up better than other decks.
Well,
right?
I mean, it's because it's the type of deck that it's like, if you think about it like in like baseball terms, right? It's the type of deck that is it's a power hitter, right? Like it's only aiming for the fences. There's no, it's not looking to get base hits. It's not looking to, do bump. It's not looking for anything like that. It is power hitting for the fences every single
super fair. Yeah.
And there is a place for that, but when it's the bottom of the ninth and you just need this base hit, hitting a pop fly into left field that doesn't quite make the fence doesn't win you the game there. And I think that's kind of ultimately the issue I have with Rogsai is that I think the mentality of just continuously going for it over and over again is like just not good. Like you're not going to get the best results from that.
Sure. And I think, once again, play patterns are everything for a lot of decks, right? Like,
Right.
No, I think we're fine. Like, I'm not pressed. I think honestly, Sephiroth making that top 4 was such a confirmation of my beliefs about where the format is, right? Which is basically like, if you can play, it will have a competent pilot, to be clear, who can play stacks pieces that the format's struggling to face against.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are a little more resilient into Bowmasters, right? And these decks can exist. And this is kind of what I started with my thoughts about Balin and stuff like that, right? So the fact that this deck sort of did that confirmation in the open meta of like, hey, this deck can play and do very well and all of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That to me was very exciting because it basically proved like, oh, hey, there is this this whole angle of attack that is really underexplored right now, right? And it just means we need the right commanders to make it happen. And to me, that's now gonna be my obsession for the next like couple weeks. Is just like, what's that thing for me? Like, what is that deck that is attacking on this axis that the format? Because when I play Balin, and this is a deck I do.
You played Balin a couple times over the weekend. I thought it looked great.
Yeah. And when I played it, right, like the one thing was very clear to me is that the people just aren't ready for those stony sounds effects or the high noons or anything like that. Like people just fold to those things, right? And so to me, that is such a green light, go sign, a positive signal, whatever it might be, right? So with that in mind, I'm very optimistic kind of moving forward that we can cook. You know what I mean?
I really like the like Nadu creature combo packages right now.
Yeah, those are super fun.
I got to do the thing a couple times.
Yeah,
feels so good.
Yeah, big shukin. Feels great.
I'll tell you what. Once you get a nomads or like a shaman out with a Nadu, I didn't know I could feel that way about a game, but I said this to you when we were there. I said on the podcast that Nadu doesn't do it for me. After playing against Nadu and with Nadu and doing all of the stuff over the past few weeks, deck fucking does it for me. Wow, it really does it for me.
Yeah.
It makes me feel things I haven't felt in a long time.
Stupid.
Listen, man. I just heard people complaining about Nadu over the weekend. Oh, it's so miserable to play against. So I'm like, yeah, because Rogsai is so fucking fun, right? Like, I'd much rather play against Nadu and watch them flip over cards from the top of their deck while they're like activating a thing and sacrificing every single land they fucking have than play against Rogsai sitting there going, okay, here's a breach. Do I win? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think your preference is known at this point in the format for sure. I think both are definitely very interesting decks. I don't think Nadu's a problem.
No.
I don't think. Well, yeah, I think like it's especially when people are uncomfortable with the strategy, it can definitely come up for sure. Like I literally had a point in my game where I was playing against Sam Black, who's playing Nadu. And he was like, oh, do you guys want to concede now? My opponents were staring at me and I was like, nah, I've seen away from this spot. And they were like, okay. And like, I watched it and they did. Yeah. And we got a hold of the turn. Now we were still dead because he passed with like 8 counter spells. Right. But like, it still whiffed and it still gave us an opportunity to like jam. Right. Yeah. So with that in mind, like, I don't know. I feel like it's just one of those things where it's like, and I think this came up in the dialogue a lot this weekend, right? With my comeback run, basically, which is like, I think players are too quick to give up. And I think this is where the political side of the format definitely comes in more, right? Which is like, you have a solid chance of winning if you collaborate and work with your opponents, and if you are working with opponents who are willing to collaborate in those circumstances, right?
Something Survivor.
Huh?
I said something Survivor.
Yeah, right. Like the times where I saw like decks like Nadu fall apart, right? Or when the table's able to be like, all right, cool, we'll hit it on this axis, like it crumbles here, right? Yep. Congrats. That's how that works, right? And like the same thing with Rograkh, right? Like people have been like, hey, we're keeping hands that like we're not going to give up on our own game plans, but we're at least going to not just let them win turn 2 because that'd be free as fuck, right? Yep. And guess what? It didn't. You know what I mean? And obviously the other way around too. And the Rograkh outs were like, we're just going to jam, and people of the pod were like, yeah, we're jamming. We're all going to do our own independent thing. Guess what? The people who were jamming were succeeding there, right? So like that part of the format is so pivotal, right? And that's another thing too, right? Like the long Thrasio Seedborn games, the Nadu with a bunch of value hands, right? Like they're not unbeatable. You just have to have that bit of resiliency, right? Yep. And I think that's one thing I got was like thrown towards me in my description, was that like I was 1-5 going into day 2, right? I needed to win every single game. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do my best to do that, and it did. And yeah, I mean, these things are a slog. Tournaments are a slog, and playing against these long, grindy games with multiple interactions and a lot of people talking and like doing their whole thing and lots of spells and different power dynamics and all of these things, it asks a lot of you as a player, but you can do it. It's possible. It is, everything in its time is possible, right? And there are avenues in this format that allow you to fix problems, right? I don't think, as Cal mentioned earlier, like there are not problems right now that are insurmountable. There are definitely problems that take a lot more work to answer, right? I think, once again, Rograkh and Nadu are very indicative of that. Blue Farm is very indicative of that. Sisay can be very indicative of that. Like in my semis game, like the Sisay would have easily run away with the game if, I, a very frequent Sisay pilot, was not like, okay, here's what's going to happen in this interaction. And they're going to go get this thing. There's a Smothering Tide that's the best card in their deck. Here's how we're screwed in X, Y, or Z ways, right? Like, and I was putting in the hustle to be able to like not die to Sisay, because guess what? It took all of those things. And like there were multiple times that I'm like, had we just let them get away with this one, big air quotes, like we would have just been cooked, right? And also like
big L for the shut up and play crowd, really.
But like it's just part of the format, right? Like it is part of it. And if once again, if you don't want to engage in that part of the game, play Rograkh, enjoy, have fun, do your thing, right? But for everybody else, there are avenues in this format that make it so that a broken card isn't running away with the whole thing, right? Like that is like if you're in the shut up and play mentality, like that's you doing you, and that's fine, right? But like you are going to lose percentage points because of it, and it's just kind of how it is. I don't know.
Numbers reflect it, but overall, I think the format's in a good place. Invitational and open were pretty interesting. I'll be interested to see what next month looks like. We kind of said this last month. August is going to look weird. Let's take a look at what, September looks like. And that's going to be real indicative. Jesus. That's going to be the real picture of what the format really is going to be looking like.
I think also like it will be really interesting to, well, I don't even know if I necessarily agree that this month won't be indicative, but like, I think the numbers are definitely skewed, right? Like the Invitational, which is like premier tournament, only had 64 players, right? So like the numbers are barely going to show up, right? Even though it's this like premier event, right? I think what we're going to hopefully see is that post Invitational, people are going back to experimenting more and trying new things. I know that's my mentality leaving into it, and it doesn't have to be everyone else's. Like you can work on perfecting your decks and whatnot, but I think it's a really good time to basically test in the format, try a new deck, like even if it's an established deck, like try something new, like get out of that space while there's not $10,000 on the line, and then as we're moving forward, like prepping for the Boil 2, all of that stuff, like it's a really good time to experiment with what the format can be,
Yeah. It'll be very interesting. It'll be interesting. It's just,
yeah.
Well, we will see how things work out. Overall, one thing I did want to mention here before we start wrapping things up, you had mentioned the MLC earlier, and I got so many fucking messages like from people. Like I had at least 15 different people while we were at the Open just come up and be like, when's the MLC coming back? And I was like, well, when I get funding. And I was like, turns out it's a lot of fucking work. Because, something that I think, a lot of people might not know is behind the scenes, the MLC was me and Phoenix holding everything together with a roll of duct tape.
Yeah.
Which is not sustainable, which is why we have not done it in 2 years.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the things that, if you are somebody and you're watching and you would like to see that happen, please, donate to our Patreon, let me know, and, things like that. And we can try to make those sorts of things happen, because it is a thing that I think was really good for our format. It helped us see like a lot of different stuff that you can do. It exposed people to a lot of different ways of playing the game. But also, it was a really cool thing to bring the community together for summer. So.
Yeah. And maybe let's give this a little more actionable type of thing, right?
Yeah.
If this is something that like you are interested in supporting, let's get like a Google Doc going or some sort of thing, right, where you can like advocate support. Because like if we're like, and this is something I pushed Cal to like mention this in the podcast. I think the MLC was something that people really gelled onto, and the response this weekend was insane. Like there was a lot of people who brought.
I know people went up to you when I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And people are like, when's that coming back? And you're like, I don't know, talk to Cal.
Yeah, exactly. And so like to me, right, it felt like this is something we can talk about. And if people literally would be willing to put in for a Kickstarter to like actually make it a viable thing, because like the whole concept of the MLC was that it's like this professional sports version of cEDH, right? Now we have our tournaments, we have stuff like that, right? But like this is kind of the idea that came out from that, but also, supplying a space for diverse creators, people around the world who no longer really have these like online tournaments, who are now sectioned to like their country, can't fly out to the US, can't fly to Europe for the Lisbon tournament. A lot of different places, right? So there's a lot of people who don't really have that platform, that voice right now, that the MLC would help to lift and elevate and a bunch of stuff like that, right? So if that is something that you want, to push for, if it's something that you miss, like let us know, leave in the comments below. But like legitimately, if it's a Kickstarter that you want to happen, leave that in the comments, because it's not going to be worth Cal's time and energy and passion if it's not going to get supported, right? But if it is, and if it's something people really, really want, which I know a lot of people do, it needs help to happen, right? And to be up to the standards that were worth getting a team, right? Because like at the end of the day, realistically, the roll of duct tape doesn't last, right?
No, and sometimes it runs out.
Right. And so realistically, Cal needs to hire a team to do this thing, and hire production and pay for equipment. And I can't even begin to say X, Y, and Z amount of stuff, right? So if legitimately that is something people want, there's a quantifiable way to do that. And I highly encourage you to let us know that is a thing. Yeah.
Full send on that. I appreciate Ian jumping in, because I'm not good at articulating needs. I'll give you a hot take, but when it comes to asking for help, I'm not exactly the best. So I appreciate that. But no, for real, if people want to see that come back, I would be more than willing to make it happen. If we can see that there is enough grassroots support for it, if we can see that we can get some sort of monetary backing for it so that it can be feasible. Because, it can't just be me and Phoenix sitting in our offices every Saturday until the end of time, like sitting there recording stuff and trying to get it online for people. And, that don't work.
It's just not feasible. Yeah.
It quite frankly, it burnt Phoenix and I out. Like there's a reason Phoenix doesn't really do a whole lot of stuff anymore, and that is part of it. And I would love to do it, but I'd also really like to continue playing Magic and not killing myself.
Yeah.
So that being said, if you would also be interested in getting coaching from one Ian ComedIan, I believe that's your legal name, right? It's Ian Comed.
Yeah.
How can people get a hold of you, Mr. Comed?
Wow, that's a thing you said. Now, hey everybody. As you all know, at this point, I do coaching for cEDH full time. So if you're interested in receiving that, you can find me at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can find me at comedianmtg on Twitter and Instagram, or comedian_mtg over on Discord. Any of those places. The programs have been going really well lately. I have had, playing some of the people that I coached at the Invitational is really cool. I don't know. Like it's been a really awesome process, and seeing people that I've worked with. We've mentioned multiple people today that I've worked with in the past, and so if you want to hustle to take that step up in your game, reach out to me. And if you're looking to have a little more success in your next Top Deck season, it's a good way to do it.
I started watching that 70 show over the weekend. So
I was wondering what sort of spastic movements you were having. That's good to know. Yeah.
I was doing the hustle.
Yes, you were doing great, and I'm proud of you.
Oh, thanks.
Is that good? Was it believable?
I think that I bought it, so as long as I bought it, it's really all that matters, right?
Good.
But yeah, thank you, everybody. If you want to support the show, if you want to support the channel, head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors, and you can help support us there. Also, if everybody watching this video on YouTube went and hit that subscribe button, we would get to 10,000 subscribers in no time. Currently, we are at, as of recording, 9,395. 96. So if you all went down and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, things like that, helps give an offering to Algorithm Jesus. We greatly appreciate it, and it helps us out immensely. And it costs you nothing except a little bit of thumb movement. So
nothing but thumb.
This is Mind Sculptors. I'm Cal.
I'm Thummy.
Stay sculpty, everybody.